Greetings, friends. I am so excited about this month's book club because, first and foremost, we get to talk about a book and an oracle deck in one book club, both of which I really, really love. And secondly, because instead of just talking about the books that I want to focus on this month, we also get to talk to the author of said books. So, before we get into the book club aspect of this, the review, the overview, I am going to give you a short interview that I was able to do recently with the amazing Phillip Carr-Gomm. For folks who don't know who Phillip is, this will be a really beautiful introduction for you to get to know his perspective, his spirit, and the reason why so many people turn to him for spiritual guidance. Phillip was the chosen chief of the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, also known as OBOD, from 1988 until 2020, and that is probably what he's most known for. But he is also an acclaimed psychotherapist and sophrologist. He teaches beautiful expressions of spirituality that he likes to call the perennial tradition, meaning what does human spirituality look like outside of labels and boxes, which I really appreciate. He's been very active on YouTube and blogs and podcasts, and so you can find a wealth of content out there from Phillip, just sharing openly and freely so much inspiring wisdom. Now, I mentioned we're going to talk about two of his works in this month's book club, but there are so many. We will be talking about the Book of English Magic and his Druid plant oracle. He also did a Druid animal oracle, a Druid craft tarot, lessons in magic, seek teachings everywhere, Druid mysteries, lots of really, really beautiful books, and I recommend all of them. I've actually read all of them. So if you read Book of English Magic and you fall in love, keep going. Really nice. And I also want to mention for folks that are interested, and I will put this down in the details below, that Phillip has several really lovely guided meditations for free on his website, along with videos and a blog and all of that. So just really generous with information. And with that, let's move over to the interview portion, and then after that I'll come back and we'll talk about the books. I apologize for the grainy video part of this, but my internet connection was not great, but the audio is awesome, so you'll be able to hear every word. All right, so Phillip Carr-Gomm, thank you so much for taking a little bit of time out of your day to come chat with us. I'm trying to introduce some of my virtual friends here on the internet to just a few of your works in particular today. There are so many. Definitely talking about the Book of English Magic in the book review, and of course the Druid plant oracle, because it is beautiful. And really, I guess it's just an excuse to talk to you about plants and magic and nature. And I'll be going over the book and the oracle deck a little more in detail later on in a glowing review, of course. But for now, can I ask you a few questions?
Sure. Great to be with you, Josh. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So most of our viewers are, more than anything, going to be plant nerds, herbal magicians, green sorcerers, wort cunning devotees. So I wonder if you might share a bit with us about how plants and trees and herbs, anyone from the green realm, have been part of your own spiritual path.
Well, when you're deprived of something, that's often a kind of way in. And so I was an urban kid. I grew up in a city in London. I was in Notting Hill Gate as a kid. And this was like, it's hard to imagine now, but I was born in 1952, which is only 7 years after the Second World War. So there were bomb sites, there were bomb craters, around the city. And so it was a kind of very urban environment. But when my parents took me to my grandparents' house in the Hampshire countryside, they had a beautiful little thatched cottage. with the garden, and in the garden, a little stream ran through it, and it was just sheer magic. And every time I was taken into the country, I just adored it. In fact, my parents told the story of how they, when I was about 10, and we were driving through the Black Forest in Germany on a holiday, and we got out for a break, and I disappeared into the woods, and I didn't want to come back. They had to go and find me, and I said I didn't want to go back. I was off into the forest. And I'm sure this is a very common experience for lots of us. When you're out in nature, you just want to take for the hills, and yeah, so that's how it began for me.
That is beautiful. And now where you are in Sussex, right? Looks incredibly beautiful. You have South Downs and Wealden Greensand and Pevensey Levels, like really beautiful wild spaces that are kind of your backyard now.
Yeah.
Have any of those spaces, now that you've kind of settled into, the woods and the hedgerows that are a little more accessible to you now, have any of those spaces become important to your path, your mental health, whatever, as far as just places you've created relationship with in these ways?
Sure. I mean, luckily we have quite a large garden. And when you do these meditations that start off something like, imagine you're in an ideal spot in the country. I always imagine I'm in the garden, and often if I'm listening to them, I'll actually be sitting in it physically, which is great, and which is so nice. But we have various sacred sites in the landscape around us. So just about 10 minutes walk away is this mound that I write about in a book I wrote called The Druid Way, which was a walk in the Sussex landscape. And there's this sort of sacred mound that is there that you can go on top of, and it's not very high. But when you're on top of it, you have this wonderful sense of a panorama around you. And then a bit further along, about 15 minutes drive, is the Long Man of Wilmington, which is this giant figure cut into the chalk downland, which again, where we do ceremonies, the festivals, and so on. So there are a lot of spots locally that I absolutely love, and we have the sea near us as well. And I find more and more that the sea calls to me almost. I want to be by the sea. I kind of totally get the fact that as people get older, they want to end up by the sea. It's almost like returning to the source or something.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I personally live in a city. I'm not far from, beautiful wild spaces, but there's definitely some jealousy. Definitely some jealousy there, which I appreciate. A lot of your, of course, you were chosen chief of the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids from 88 to 2020. It's a long run. So lots of Druidry in your writings and in your teachings, which I appreciate. And I also really appreciate the sort of, you talk about the perennial tradition, that there are these threads of truth, of experience, of relationship that we can attach to kind of beyond name and form, beyond label and box, which is fascinating to me, because while I am, relatively attached to concepts like Druidry and paganism, and even medieval sorcery some days, it's really that concept that I think the plants themselves teach, that we're all kind of working a path together, and it has many different flavors and expressions culturally and based on time and place and circumstance. But I think the plants teach this perennial spirituality that you also talk about. So I think that's really interesting. But that being said, is the folks, we love to talk about the Druidry stuff. Considering that so much of our plant lore obsession is wrapped up in ancient and contemporary Druidry, both historical and imagined, I guess. I think the invitation is really there for an intentional engagement with the green world, with our green allies, both by modern druids and I think anybody following kind of a nature revering or earth-centered spiritual path, however you want to boil that down. Why do you think plant lore, especially that surrounds trees, right, is something so important to Druidry, but also to kind of all nature-focused spiritualities? I mean, every single one we look at, the trees are there, the plants are there, woven into myth, woven into legend. Why do you think that they always show up?
Well, I think, there's something the classical writers wrote, about the Druids, saying the grove is the center of their whole religion. And so they're saying, something rather interesting, because a grove is a clearing in some ways. It's a gathering of trees, but also of space, which immediately, it's such an evocative image, because you've got both the plant world and the more than world as well, which is no thing. So you've got thing and no thing. So that's immediately a very interesting sort of kind of domain to be exploring. And but also, I'm incredibly proud, I suppose, of the way that Druidry places trees at the heart of the spiritual sort of experience, if you like, because the word druid means, in a way, forest sage, because tree, the word dru comes from oak, the idea of the oak tree, and then id has an Indo-European root meaning knowledge or wisdom. So you have the knowledge of the oak, which, if you expand it, is the forest sage, if you like. That's the best kind of definition of the druid, as the forest sage. And trees are, there's, I think, many of us more and more, as we understand the situation the world is in terms of the planetary degradation and the threat to the environment, we're all becoming much more sensitized to the significance of the plant world, of the tree world. It's sad that we have to realize this as we're starting to lose such a lot of it. But that's the reason, I think, why there's such an interest today. And there's something about the way in the relationship between trees and the human being. There's this incredible bond. The way they provide oxygen, we provide the carbon dioxide with the air that we breathe out. We're in this complete symbiosis with them. So they're really our brothers and sisters. We coexist on the planet together. If there were no trees, we wouldn't be here. And there's a way in which they're almost like our elder brothers and sisters. They could function without us, but we can't function without them.
I like that. Yeah. It's really easy for us to see ourselves in them too sometimes, which is speaks to that sort of ancestral. Very interesting. Thanks for that. Let's do maybe one or two more if you got time.
Sure, yeah.
So in the Book of English Magic, the one that we're going to be focusing on later, there's a really beautiful honor done to the cunning folk of old, which I really appreciate. It's probably the chapter, the shag-haired wizard of Pepper Alley is probably my favorite. And mention is made in that chapter about cunning folk combining herbal remedy with prayer and charm, a practice that I think now we would probably call spiritual herbalism versus kind of a reductionist herbalism or allopathic herbalism. So I also have to mention that you mentioned Culpeper in that chapter, which is near and dear to my heart, right? We don't talk about him enough. So it seems that we're going through something of kind of an herbal renaissance at the moment, where people are really interested in the medicine of plants, the magic of plants, the animistic relationship of plants. And I think you sort of segued into that with what you just said, but why do you think that renaissance is happening now? It really feels like it's just at a boiling point of interest, and people jumping onto this green bandwagon of sorts.
Mm. Well, I think one of the reasons why there's such an interest in plant medicine now, and in the spiritual as well as the physical properties of plants, is because the more we learn about nature and the more we learn about the connectedness of nature, the fact that nothing is self-contained, Simard's work on the mother tree, this fact that the trees are all connected through the mycelial network, and there's this sharing process that goes on. And then all the work that's been done on forest bathing, where we see the way the terpenes that we breathe in actually end up entering our bloodstream. That those sort of ideas about there being some sort of separation, the plant's out there and I'm over here, start to dissolve when we realize there's this constant exchange occurring. So even if we're not touching a plant or drinking it or eating it, if we're walking past it, we might be breathing in something that is changing our bloodstream. I mean, that in itself is just utterly extraordinary. And then if we include some concept of energy, or we sense ourselves as an energetic field, then we realize, well, we ask ourselves, well, what if the plant has an energetic field as well? So when I'm sitting with a plant, I'm sitting by a plant, our energetic fields are mingling together. And that's an incredibly exciting thought. And I think there's, despite all the bad news that's around in the world and all the terrible suffering and conflict, at the same time, there's lots of amazing positive stuff going on as well. And a feature of that is this increasing openness and sensitivity to the plant world. That's one of those manifestations of a growing in our consciousness, a development, some kind of spiritual maturing of our consciousness that is happening, even while there's chaos around us.
Well said. Yeah, I think about the breath all the time, and that kind of, as you mentioned earlier, the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide and that symbiotic relationship that we're in means that whether we're conscious of it or not, we're always in relationship, right? Like that communication, that conversation is always happening.
Occurring all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I tell people, it's not, you don't have to do something new. You just have to kind of slow down to what's already happening. Like it's already going on, right?
Exactly.
Which I think is very cool. It's a different proposition than what we're usually given when we think about engaging with a spiritual path, or, usually there's something to be done, something to be enacted. When this relationship already exists, it's already there.
It already exists. You just got to become aware of it, just open to the what is already. Yeah, right. Exactly. It's very powerful. It's lovely. Yeah.
I love it. Last thing is, I wonder if you have any plant story or bit of tree lore, or snippet of an epic plant legend that you think about often or meditate on, or something that's influenced your path. Where there's so many good famous ones, but I wonder if there are any that hold a special place for you.
Well, I can tell a little story about how this idea that you can use trees to communicate over time and space, which is a really interesting one that we work with in Druidry. And I remember once a really striking moment when I was running a workshop in Holland, and there was a mother who had become estranged from her daughter, her adult daughter, who had had a baby. So she was estranged from the baby as well. And she was very sad because it was the baby's first birthday, but she couldn't see her granddaughter because her daughter, she wasn't on good terms with her daughter. So we did an exercise where we all went and tuned into a tree to send messages. So I introduced this idea that a tree can be used as a conduit, as a telephone, as a way of sending a message. And one of the ways to do this is to wander in an open way through the forest until you feel drawn to a particular tree who wants to work with you. And that means not using your rational mind to choose the most handsome looking tree, but really just to be open to the tree that calls to you. And then we went out, and half an hour later, we came back and we sat and we shared a thing. And she started to cry as she told the story of how she was walking through the woods. And of course, she did the inevitable thing, which is your intellect comes into play and you're looking for an attractive tree that seems kind of appropriate for you to sit beside. And she started to go towards this beautiful tree. And she got this strong sense, no, don't sit with me. And there was this straggly little young tree. And it was, no, I must sit by that one. And so she sat by this sapling like that. And she went and she closed her eyes. She did the exercise that I suggested, where you just basically imagine, you speak through to the spirit of the tree. And you said, please, can you send this message too? And then you give your message and then you let it go and trust and thank the tree and then open your eyes. So she did that. And as she opened her eyes, she saw a little balloon nestling amongst the leaves. And she reached out her hand. In fact, the instruction was, I had told people to reach out and to take, maybe there'll be a gift from the tree, like a leaf or, and so she saw what she thought was an autumn leaf that was bright red. So, and she got the feeling this was the gift from the tree. So she put her hand out to pick up the autumn leaf, but it was in fact a red balloon. And when she looked at the balloon, it had happy birthday written on it. And of course, it was the birthday of the baby. So this was like, she was so filled with happiness that somehow in this completely kind of irrational way, she had made this connection with her baby granddaughter. It's lovely.
That's incredible. I can hear stories like that 100 a day, and it never ceases to fire me up, about this work, because there are so many examples like that. There's just so much happening in this world that is just magical, pure magic.
Yeah.
So I appreciate
absolutely.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your time and all the generous gifts you put into the world. It's really been an incredible honor for me to speak with you after reading you and listening to you for all these years. A great blessing to have you here. So thank you so much, Philip. I really appreciate it.
A pleasure, Josh. Great to talk to you.
So I hope you enjoyed getting to know Philip. It was a huge honor for me to get to talk to him. I really just reached out and said, hey, I'm going to be talking about a couple of your books on my channel. I would love to chat with you if you have time. And he said yes, and it worked out. So very grateful and appreciative. I always think that when you can connect with the person of an author, kind of understand who wrote the book, where the words came from, it really gives depth to the work. So whenever I can, I will be doing things that way. So let's talk about two of Philip's works. The first that I want to talk about is the Book of English Magic. Now, this is a beefy book. Mine is well worn. And the thing that sticks out to me the most about this book and why it's been so important to me over the last few years is that it gives an anchoring, a foundation for so many of the contemporary magical, divinatory, even pan-pagan practices that we all have come to know and love. We think of these various different aspects of working and living a magical path, but we're not always aware of the ancestral rooting or where they come from or how they've evolved naturally over the ages to suit the people in whose hands they are being worked. So this is a really lovely book because it gives context to so many of the magical practices that many of us are familiar with, many of us have seen presented and represented in many different ways. So as I mentioned, it's a big book. The chapters are really clearly laid out. So if there are things that you're not super interested in learning about, you can just skip right over them. If there are things you're really interested in, like wart cunning, herbalism, astrology, early medieval sorcery, you can go straight to that section and get into it. As I mentioned in the interview, with Philip, I have a favorite chapter in this book, and it's the one that I've taken the most notes on and the one that I've returned to most, and it is The Shag-Haired Wizard of Pepper Alley, Cunning Folk, Girdle Measurers, and the Fairy Faith. So I'm sure with that title alone, you are well aware of why I love that chapter. And it's just an interesting one to look at because Philip gives a really beautiful route to where so many of our modern herbal practices are rooted, where they're coming from, and not only the medicinal but the magical. I really appreciate as well that a big nod was given to Nicholas Culpeper, who is one of my favorite ancestral kind of heroic deified herbalists for some of us contemporary cunning folk. And the fact that voices like Culpeper's were given room in this book is really important because we tend to overlook some of these old ancestral herbalists in favor of the people that are teaching now. But when we go back to these old texts, we get a romance and a power and a depth to the practice that sometimes we miss in the modern world. For a lot of people doing this work now, it can be a little bit of a novelty. It can be a little bit reductionist. So to get perspective from somebody who was practicing it in a way that meant everything in the moment has been really edifying to my own work. So the Book of English Magic, chapters on all kinds of topics, everything from early cave traditions throughout the British Isles, Druidry, Anglo-Saxon sorcery, Merlin, King Arthur, the Avalonian tales, witches and warlocks. There's a good section on alchemy, cunning folk, of course, Freemasonry, and getting into Rosicrucianism, and the Renaissance of English magic in the 21st century, which is also a very, very good chapter. So if you would like some really digestible, really friendly presented historical context to some of the sorceries and the wizardry and the magic that we all love, this is a beautiful book. Cannot recommend highly enough. With that, we're going to move away from books just for a moment and talk about an oracle deck that Philip did with his wife, Stephanie. And this is the Druid Plant Oracle. And as an oracle, it is a deck of cards, not unlike the tarot, that features plants and plant symbolism that are rooted in mostly Druid lore. Herbs and plants that get brought up in the myths and lores and legends of the British Isles and of the sort of pan-Celtic world. And so it's a really beautiful way to connect with wisdom, to tap into the world tree, to gain insight and reflection working with plant symbolism. This is pretty deluxe. It comes with a really nice slide out case. And one of my favorite things about this deck, besides the deck itself, is the book. This is not a pamphlet. It's not a handout. This is a proper book that gives historical context, folk names, botanical information, lots of different bits and pieces about each card and each plant. And you can see it's, averages probably 5 pages per plant, and no details are spared. So as you're learning the various lores and symbolisms of these plants, you're also really learning the plants. It's not just, hey, this plant in a reading means this, move on. It's understand the lore behind it and how that story coming up as a response to your query could contain the essence of the answer or the mystery, right? So let's look at a couple of the cards. The back of the card is has the Obad 3 beams, or the sort of neo-pagan Druidry 3 beams symbol, which I really like. And the images themselves are really beautiful. Full color, very rich, very complex. As you look at these images, every time I see little details, little things that stick out to me. So, for example, this is Meadowsweet, and I know that it's always kind of hard to do this, but there's a hidden face down in the bottom there, and an image of the plant, and some flora and fauna that share space with Meadowsweet. I'll just show you a couple to give you a little teaser. This is Mugwort and Yarrow. No, it's been a little blurry. So, really beautiful Oracle deck. Now, I have super big hands, so I'm trying to demonstrate how big these cards are. They're large, which I really like because when I have wanted to just draw one card, it makes it easy for me to prop this up on an altar or a shrine or set it on the floor to meditate with. It's not tiny. I can see it by candlelight. I think there seems to be intention behind the design of these cards that they are meant to be worked with and sat with and journeyed with, which I really appreciate, of course. And I like to photograph a lot of my readings and keep them in my camera roll for reference, and the fact that they're nice and big means that if I'm out and about, I can open my camera roll and look at images of the spread that I did and really be able to still see the colors, the textures, and have the feelings that the card evokes. So really very beautiful deck. There are some blank ones that come with this deck, so you can draw in plants that are really special to you or meaningful. And I wanted to give you also a little bit of a look at the section before the cards get started. And it's really great because we're looking at stories like the Irish goddess Ermid. We're looking at Caradwyn. We're looking at how the Druids may have seen plants and worked with them in a very animistic, sorcerous way. So you get a really lovely little primer before you get into these incredible cards. So once again, 36 cards, beautifully packaged. I really, really love these. And then Philip also did the Animal Oracle, which similarly presents animals that show up in Druidic lore time and time again. I happen to have that deck as well. This one comes with a hard back book with all the information, and the cards are just as beautiful as the Plant Oracle. So if you're interested in bestiary and working with animal symbolism, there you go. Air Dragon, first one that comes up. So 2 and actually 3 works by the incredible and generous Phillip Carr-Gomm. I hope you enjoyed meeting him and learning a little bit about some of his works, and 2 of my favorite books that he's done. And you'll go out and support his work, and let me know what you think. Until next time, take care.